Hey guys, and welcome to today's video. So in this one I'm going to be reviewing perhaps the worst mouse I've ever had the displeasure of using. So to find out why I hated it so much, let's just find out. So if you watched my unboxing of this, there's a few reasons why I picked up the Apple Magic Mouse 2. And the primary one was because I was doing quite a lot of, sensitive input stuff, and I wanted something other than the trackpad because it was causing me just to get a bit of hand cramp. For the precise input of things like spreadsheets, stock and inventory, and everything else like that, I just figured this would be amazingly nice to have. One of the bonuses of something like this is it has the trackpad sort of like gesture area on the top here, so I'd be able to do things like hopefully close applications, use it with my iPad as well and be able to go home to the main screen from that. And really it was a massive letdown in pretty much every single area. Now I'll start off with the things that I liked about it, and the first thing is actually one of the things I also hate about it is it's really small, it's sleek, it's very Apple-esque in the fact it looks really neat. See, it's very lightweight, it'll fit into a bag very easily, you don't need much space for it, and yeah, that's pretty much where it stops. Now granted, it does have some of those gestures that I was after, so being able to scroll, being able to kind of swipe between pages and stuff like that, that worked relatively well. Considering how small this thing is, it didn't feel too cramped to use any of those gestures. But again, it was pretty much lacking in most of the gestures that I was hoping for, especially when you start pairing up with something like the iPad and then you want to be able to do like your pinch to go home, for example. Doesn't have that. So that is pretty much it for what I liked about it. So I'm going to talk about the reasons why I absolutely hated this thing, and especially the price point, bearing in mind that this is retailing for between £70 and £80 or $70 to $80 depending where you are. It is lacking in so many different respects. It is absolutely untrue, and it really comes down to the fact that this is, I believe it was launched in about 2015, so the era of when Apple was absolutely known for going for form over function. It is the era of when we got things like the butterfly keyboard, just absolutely awful devices and awful accessories from Apple, where it was all about going slim, it was going light, but actually the function behind these things it didn't exist because we just had some crazy people in charge of design who were absolutely pushing out things that looked amazing, but they just weren't fit for purpose, and this is a key example of that. First up, the size. I do not have massive hands by any stretch of the imagination, and I'll do a few close-up shots so you can see how this works, but ultimately, because it is such a small device, there's about room on there for a couple of fingers when you're holding it, and these two fingers just seem to go to waste and get dragged all over it, and my thumb as well, as it's going back and forth, you kind of end up having to do a bit of a tent-like maneuver in order to hold it. The only thing magical about this device is how fast it gives you a hand cramp. It must be like a new world record for doing so. They could turn this into a torture device, for God's sake. And you know what? I was a teenage boy once, and I've never got hand cramp as fast as this Apple Magic Mouse 2 gave me. It's abysmal. It is far too small, and it is just not ergonomic at all. It just doesn't make sense. Your fingers are getting dragged all over. You have to hold it in a stupid position. And then going on from the size, because it is so small, it can't accommodate very many gestures. I can scroll my web page up and down and I can swipe back and forth, but I could just do that with a normal mouse wheel. It doesn't have anything like pinch to zoom, it doesn't have anything like pinch to close. One of the big drawbacks of this, it might not matter too much if you're using a MacBook that doesn't have a touch bar, but when you pair this up with a MacBook with a touch bar, you don't always have the correct functions at the top of your MacBook because the touch bar is just a little bit hit and miss sometimes. So if you want to close your apps and just open up your launchpad to get all of the applications open at once so you can switch into something, you can't necessarily do that without having to go into touch bar, tap something else, and then go into it, and it just slows things down. I wish it had the same gestures that the Apple Trackpad has. Now, I know that's maybe asking for a bit too much, but it probably wouldn't be asking for too much if they made this thing a regular size, for human hands, not for, I don't know, I think it's probably too small for children as well. If it was a little bit larger, you'd have more space on there for more gestures to be able to, pinch to close. And like I said at the beginning, when you pair this up with an iPad, it just becomes quite a poor experience because you open up an application you can't close the application unless, of course, you reach over to your iPad, get the gorilla arm out, swipe and then close, or if you have a keyboard that, hopefully has the option to close those tabs down so you can go back to your main screen. Because this doesn't have those gestures, it's not really fit for using with the iPad as well, and it's not a great accessory. Which brings in the trackpad. You can obviously get the Magic Trackpad 2 on its own, and that would make a much, much better accessory. Other things that I didn't like about it, obviously the lightning port on the bottom. Who was drinking what when they designed this thing? That is just the most ridiculous way to charge a device ever. You've then got to kind of tilt it, and it makes no sense. Let's just put it that way. But probably one of the biggest issues, gestures aside and small form factor aside, is it doesn't track particularly well, and it feels like a pretty cheap mouse when it comes to its tracking. So obviously this sort of table at the moment, I can use most mice on it, and I can use this kind of cutting mat that I've got out, and they all register pretty well. But I kind of gave this the benefit of the doubt that maybe it was kind of picking up quite a bit of interference. So I got a sort of relatively cheap mouse mat that I got as a Christmas gift a while ago, and it didn't do well on that. So I got my proper gaming mouse mat that is really precise and has never failed me with anything, and it worked better, but it still wasn't a good experience. So the overall kind of functionality of this is it's still not a very precise mouse. So not only do you have to deal with the issues of it giving you hand cramp and trying to hold it in these weird and bizarre ways, it just doesn't track particularly well either. I've used £10 mice or $10 mice that work much better than this, and they're so much more comfortable. With this, you are absolutely paying for the Apple logo, and I completely understand now why you see so many of these on eBay where people have bought an iMac and it comes through with it and they get rid of it straight away. It's because it's a rubbish mouse. It's absolutely awful. I can't see this being good for anybody at all. It's far too small. The gestures just aren't complete. The tracking is average at best, and just the design, it's just to brag that you've got an Apple device, and that's pretty much it. Almost everything about this mouse is abysmal, properly abysmal. Now, I use a Logitech G502 for gaming all the time, and something like this you can pick up for about 50 quid or $50, and you can get a wireless one and they retail for about 80 quid, so about the same price. Now, straight away, when I hold this, it fits a human hand. You've got the sort of thumb rest here, so your thumb's not dragging all over. It's a decent size, so you can get your whole hand around it without having to do a tent maneuver. The buttons are in the right places, and obviously it doesn't have the gestures. But like I said, the gestures on this thing aren't good. They're not complete. They don't feel particularly Apple, considering how well they do trackpads. And that brings me on to the last complaint is Apple make incredible trackpads. The trackpad on the Mac is just, it's beautiful. I absolutely love using it, but sometimes it can just get a bit tiring to use. I don't understand why they can't make a decent mouse. I mean, this thing is just poor, and anything that came before it was okay at best. Now, what I'm really hoping for is that now we're seeing Apple Silicon rolling out into most of these devices, and we're apparently going to be getting a new redesigned iMacs and MacBooks next year. Fingers crossed, we might see a redesigned Magic Mouse. And if we do, Apple, please, for the love of God, make it for humans. Make it for humans, not just something I'm going to put on display and go, hey, look how pretty my mouse is, because that's about all it's good for. I would like something that is bigger, fits the human hand for starters, but also in being bigger gives us a larger surface area for some better gestures that are going to work really well with the iPads and really well with the Mac as well, because this just overall feels like a really incomplete product, and it's just, I do not recommend it. In case you didn't gather that from the rest of the video, which ultimately, although this is a review, it's turned into more of a rant. There is nothing about this that makes me want to recommend it. So if you're looking at buying one of these because you want to pair it up for similar reasons that I was looking for, to have that full gesture ecosystem that you get from Apple, this isn't it. It's just absolutely not it. And even if the gestures were amazing and as good as they are on an Apple trackpad, I still wouldn't recommend it because it's so incredibly uncomfortable to use. It's far too small, far too slim, and there's just no room for fingers to go anywhere. Like I said, that tent maneuver, it will give you hand cramp pretty quick, and all you need to do is search for people getting hand cramp online with the Magic Mouse 2, and there are a gazillion results about it, and I can completely understand why. So to sum up, you're probably better off just picking up a cheap $10 to $20 mouse instead, a little Bluetooth one that even comes with a dongle or something. If you're not going to be using it all the time, go for something like that. If not, step up and get a decent mouse that is made for long-term use. There are so many mice out there that all sorts of different manufacturers make, and they make them again for humans. They make them for long-term use. The problem with this is it might be okay for like a 5 to 10 minute short spurt, but even then it was giving me hand cramp. You want something, if you're going to be using a mouse for a lot of work and you're using it for hours at a time, you want something that's going to fit your hand, be comfortable, and just easy to use. And the Magic Mouse just isn't it. So do your research, find something that's going to suit your needs much better than something like this. I would even recommend having a mouse and then maybe even a Magic Trackpad too if you're going to be using it with an iPad. But this on its own is just, it is one of the worst devices I have ever used, and that's saying something because I've used a lot of bad devices, but this is a typical Apple form over function back from that era when they really didn't care about the end user experience or how well it worked. All they cared about was how it looked. And this is what we get because of it. So thank you very much, Apple. We hate that era and we hate you for that era. But yeah, let's put that aside. So like I said, I hope that has helped. And if it has, hit that subscribe button because we'll be having all sorts of different videos coming up in the future as well. Also, whilst you're at it, check out our social media channels because we're currently pushing loads of effort into that. So if you want to connect with us, come on over. And if you've got any questions at all or any video ideas that you'd like us to shoot, pop them in the comments. We'll send them over to our social media. In the meantime, we will see you soon and be back with some more awesome content in the future. Bye.